Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in TradFi, digital assets, technology, and financial planning. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk this afternoon, we have Rajesh Vashist, CEO of Nasdaq-listed SiTime, Olivier Blanchard, Research Director of Semiconductors, EV, and Auto at Futurum, and we have Benjamin Lee, Professor of Electrical and Systems Engineering and Computer and Information Science at the University of Pennsylvania. They join me to discuss the state of the semiconductor chips market, massive demand for AI, and the future of procurement and supply chain. Gentlemen, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks. Let's go around the horn here. Rajesh, I'll start with you. Give us your thoughts on the current industry. What are some of the major factors impacting it, and where does SiTime sit in the semi ecosystem?
Well, thank you for having me. And let me bring us up to what SiTime does, just as an introduction to the market. SiTime is the only company in the world that does timing chips. So timing is a $10 billion industry. It's not a very well-known industry, and we pretty much invented it with precision timing products. We think that this need is driven by AI, automated driving, consumer industrialization. We were talking earlier about John Deere and what an amazing site they had at CES. So really, our business is about enabling a broad market, of which AI is recently one of the biggest ones. Whether it's on the GPU or the CPU, or it's making cables more interactive and more active, just moving data around very reliably with the timing like a metronome, just like it sounds.
Mm-hmm. And Olivia?
It's a good time to be in the semiconductor business, right? So on the one hand, cloud is growing pretty fast, especially driven by AI and the need for inference. And what's interesting is on the edge side and on the device side, we're also seeing AI starting to penetrate PCs. Obviously, it's been in phones for a while. We're seeing also AI go into cars. So the market for semiconductors, and specifically AI-driven or AI-focused semiconductors, is expanding into all these different segments, not just the cloud. And I think it's gonna be an exciting year for all the semi players.
Right, and Ben, tell us about the work you're doing at UPenn.
Absolutely, so I absolutely agree with Olivier about AI and growth there. We think a lot about how to design processors and memory systems that are high performance and also energy efficient. And we also think about how they are integrated into high performance systems like data centers. And what we're spending a lot of time thinking about now is power efficiency, because we see massive growth in demand for AI workloads. And we're also seeing this at a time where technology scaling is slowing. People have often heard of Moore's Law from the 60s. Those technology trends have slowed fairly significantly, even as we need more and more demand for compute. So how do we deliver that performance, meet the demands from AI, but also do so in a power efficient way? That's what we're doing at Penn, and that's what a lot of my PhD students are working on.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about AI demand in a minute and trying to keep up with that. What are some of the key top end markets? We think about consumer electronics, of course, EV, that's where we were in CES in the EV hall, and that really was the key topic there about the impact of EV and the demand in these different types of spaces for semiconductors. I mean, they're in everything.
Yeah, I mean, they're not just in everything, they're in everything at an increasing pace. Just to give you an example, there's 3,000 chips in an electric vehicle today. 3,000 semiconductors. Used to be probably about 20% of that in a standard ICE engine maybe a decade ago, if that. So I think it's not just that there are bigger chips, more expensive chips, there's just more of them. They are these ECUs. There's like 150 ECUs scattered all over the car. All of them need compute, all of them need communications, all of them need timing. But this is really a brave new world. It is. I totally agree with you, Olivier. This is not just a good year for chips. This is a great decade for chips, right? And I had a lot to say about the focus of the current administration, positive stuff, about how that's helping bring this front and center in the United States. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about the impact of AI on semis. I mean, is it a challenge in the industry, Olivier, being able to keep up with that demand? When you think about procurement, when you think about supply chain, there's no going back. The cat's out of the bag with this.
Yeah. And I mean, competition's always tough. So if it hadn't been AI, it would have been something else. So it's not really that much of a challenge for the industry. It just so happens that NVIDIA got there before everybody else. And so they have a distinct advantage, at least on the GPU side, which is really important for inference work. AMD, though, starting to catch up. and Intel obviously does really well with CPUs. But what's interesting is you have this mix, right? You have GPUs, you have CPUs, you have FPGAs, and you have ASICs, right? So you have these four categories of chips that work in different ways and at different levels for AI, depending on the use case, and that gives, I think, a lot of room for semiconductor companies to grow and to pick their lane.
Yeah, I mean, to your point before, sometimes NVIDIA can be synonymous with the industry, and of course, I mean, you don't want to also monopolize that either. I mean, there's not just one kind of need when it comes to semiconductors.
Right. And it was interesting to hear Mark Zuckerberg, or not to hear, but to read Mark Zuckerberg talk about how, his plan for general AI involves buying a lot of NVIDIA chips, NVIDIA GPUs, or some kind of alternative. And I think that's still where we are today. I think the market will look very different 3-4 years from now. But right now, yeah, NVIDIA is still the company to beat. AMD's starting to catch up a little bit. Obviously, they don't have the volume, but they have solutions that are pretty close, and in some ways better than the famous H100 that NVIDIA has been really kind of capitalizing on.
Well, I mean, Ben, does the industry, is there enough capacity for them to satisfy this demand? I know what Olivier is talking about when he's referencing what Zuckerberg had said. It's great that you have the cash on the balance sheet and you're able to make that investment, but are you able to execute at the end of the day?
That's right, and I think there's a reason why everyone is going for those NVIDIA chips. And it's the hardware is certainly very capable hardware, but a sophisticated software ecosystem built on top of it. These software libraries that they've developed over many years allow someone to go and take an open source machine learning workload, download it, and get fairly good performance based on that software stack. And you can see AMD make progress, you can see Google or Microsoft talking about building their own chips, but then building up that ecosystem, that platform, the software, to get really performance efficient machine learning on that hardware, that will take a little bit more time. And I think that's why you're seeing NVIDIA maintain its lead in the industry right now.
Right, well, it's not like you could just flip a switch and the manufacturing of availability is there. I mean, right. It's incredibly complex. I'm sure, Rajesh, you could speak to that. I mean, it takes years of development and it takes years for manufacturing.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely right. And it's not just at the cutting edge node at 2 nanometers and 3 nanometers, it's also at 180 nanometers and 65 nanometers that the capacity is needed. So I think that capacity is coming online. It'll take a little while. And glad to see that much of it is being built in the US, some of it is being built in Japan. We saw fabs in Germany. So I think a little bit more understanding of the strategic importance of all this to us. In fact, I think this is probably the second golden age of semiconductors. One of the positives of the COVID was that the shortages of semiconductors led everybody to understand how critical semiconductors were. So I think the focus has come back on it, whether you're an investor or a user or a car company, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I remember during COVID, it was a challenge to get a new car. They just didn't have the chips to make the cars. And
cars get shipped without, for example, radios to listen to because they get it afterwards because that one chip is missing.
Right. Well, and to your point earlier, too, that you want to see the manufacturing of that in the U.S. We know the security challenges that are taking place. I mean, we're reporting on it today about, infiltrating some semiconductors. We know China's an adversary, and that's why they want to onshore some of this. But again, it's a massive move, and I think that it comes back to the conversation of what does the future of procurement and supply chain look like? I mean, you don't want to totally onshore, and then, what if we do have supply chain disruptions again? So.
Right. I think, yeah, go ahead.
No, it's obviously there's two issues here. One is expanding capacity, right? I mean, we need to manufacture more of chips and different types of chips. So obviously, we need more fabs. The other thing is de-risking the supply chain by spreading it out a little bit. But it's difficult. Yeah, you have TSMC in Taiwan, essentially hoping that by being there, geopolitical pressures continue to keep Taiwan safe, I think, from a Chinese move. And I know that all the chip makers are watching the elections, or been watching the elections in Taiwan very carefully, and have interesting 6 and 12 month timelines to see what's going to happen. And hopefully, the U.S. and China sort of come to some sort of saber-rattling agreement where most of it is just posturing and we can come to some resolution. Either China doesn't necessarily make too aggressive a move against Taiwan and TSMC's supply chain stays the same, or they give TSMC in the United States and the rest of the world time to develop these fabs elsewhere so that if and when China decides to move on Taiwan, it won't be as much of a disruption to the Chinese market and the world market.
Yeah, which is so interesting because it's not like it's a land grab, it's actually all centered around technology, which, I mean, it looked very different now than it did even, let's call it 15, 20 years ago. Ben, I know you have thoughts on the future of procurement and supply chain.
Yeah, that's right, and maybe I'll comment on the Intel side of it. Intel has been super interested in getting involved in building a foundry business here in the United States, and I think there are a couple of challenges. They've articulated the right strategy. I think it's all about execution, right? So the first is advancing the underlying technology. Those transistors that they're fabricating have to be more efficient and smaller and more dense. The second is developing that foundry business with a focus on the customer. When customers go to TSMC, they know who they're dealing with and they know that their contract manufacture will be done in a timely and efficient manner. Intel still needs to prove that in the market. And I think the third thing really is about Intel allocating fabrication capacity between its own processors and its own products and those of its customers. And I think striking the right balance there and providing those reassurances to the domestic market or designers of these advanced chips will go a long way towards onshoring or de-risking the supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make an important point because you said earlier about the importance of, slow down in getting to the lower and lower nodes.
Yes.
And so what we find is that packaging becomes an even more important part of it. And in our business now, when we got started 16 years ago, we would have one MEMS chip and one analog chip. And today, our latest product may have 4 or even 5 of these. So they're packaged even more closely. Temperature, gradients, all of those things matter a lot. And I think Intel is also pushing its packaging technology as a unique thing about what they bring to the market. And I certainly think that packaging will be very important. And it's a little bit easier to bring up packaging than it is to bring up, for example, a full fab. I mean, for example, Micron, I know, is in India right now. They're not building a fab, they're building packaging and testing abilities in India, which is probably a stepping stone to further development, because that's a huge part of it.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that a little bit, the future of what this looks like. And I know you had noted that there's emerging techniques that's going to change what the industry could look like. Is it more near term? Is that longer term?
I think in the medium term, definitely ASICs were mentioned earlier, application-specific integrated circuits. They promise a lot of efficiency. You can improve performance and energy efficiency by 100x if you do things correctly. The difficulty is, of course, the design effort, the number of engineers you have to hire to design those chips. And build a software stack on top of it. That's right, exactly. So workforce development and planning here in the United States will be incredibly important to realize that vision. I think in future also the packaging and the integration of these chips into more sophisticated systems will be incredibly important. My particular research group is very interested in power and thermal management at data center scale. So yes, you're going to get advanced processors, advanced memory systems, but how do you allocate power to them? How do you manage the heat that they generate when they compute? And how do you do this when data center construction is expanding at such rapid rates? So I think that those are the sorts of questions we'll need to deal with moving forward, in addition to building those advanced chips and focusing on the semiconductors.
This might seem like an elementary question, but do all of these different types of chips manufactured by different types of companies, do they all interoperate? Are they all interoperable is the question. Let's say you have one kind of chip that goes down in a car and that needs to be fixed. What about all the other chips? Do they interoperate together?
They are, except when they're not.
Right, right.
Yeah. Basically, no, that's the right answer. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But what's really interesting about this is that you have kind of like this weird spectrum between chips that kind of do it all, right? Like the H100, where you can just put that in a data center, and it's going to work for most applications, but it might not be necessarily the most efficient, the most power efficient, the one with the most performance per watt.
No point.
Right? But then you're going to have more custom or semi-custom chips that aren't as flexible, that you can't just plug in everywhere, that are more specific to the use case, that are going to be much more power efficient. And so that adds a certain layer of complexity to an already complex ecosystem, where the chip makers and the companies packaging the chips have to decide with their customers what makes the most sense. It's either volume or just kind of like specificity of the use case with much better thermal envelopes.
It sounds like the packaging and shipping part of this is even more challenging than developing the technology for the chip itself.
Yeah, just one more thing you have to worry about, along with the software, along with the nodes, along with getting the capacity. I think, speaking as a CEO of a public company, the job used to be way easier 5 years ago. When you didn't have to worry about 2 wars, you didn't have to worry about geopolitics, China, United States, when you didn't have to worry about, inflation. So I think certainly the job has become tougher because you're keeping many moving parts going in this. And right now it's an election year, and that brings a whole level of complexity to this. But I think overall, I mean, Olivier, I think, said it. I mean, this is an amazing time for semiconductors. I think the world is changing because of very fast movements in semiconductors, which are even now not yet understood, even by us in the industry, because we're all moving so fast. So I think there are new companies popping up. Finally, there's an interest in venture capital back in semis, and of course in the public markets. I think semi companies are doing very well, barring the recent downturn, which was a result of over shipping or over demand, which was a result of the shortage, which was a result of the COVID. So it's all coming together, but in general, I think it's up and to the right for most companies that have differentiated technology.
What's going to be really interesting this year is, especially starting in H2, is the rise of the AI PC.
Yeah.
And here, so you have already Intel and AMD pushing platforms that have neural processing units, NPUs, that are specifically dedicated to AI workloads on the PC. And Qualcomm, which has a long history of extremely power efficient chipsets for phones, is getting into the PC market with an ARM-based, basically, solution. And so you're going to have these different types of AI PCs that are going to take some of the workloads out of the cloud and put them directly on your clients, especially for the smaller workloads that don't need to be in the cloud. So it's going to spread the load a little bit. I think it's going to help with energy requirements of the AI opportunity, but also it's going to be interesting to see how the x86 platform, which has sort of led the PC space for decades, is going to react to this new generation of PC chipsets that are more thermally efficient and have extremely good performance per watt characteristics. They're more like mobile phones than they are about PCs.
About PCs. Ben, do we have the appropriate skill in the labor force to be able to satisfy this demand as well? I mean, that's another question. I'm sure, Rajesh, you think about this all the time as well.
Yes.
Do we have the labor force that can satisfy these mandates?
Well, I think historically, the number of students studying electrical and computer engineering have come down quite a bit over the years. I teach a 3rd semester course in computer organization, and oftentimes students come into college thinking they want to study computer science, and then tangentially they might learn a little bit about hardware. And I think the focus on semiconductors really means that even if you want to do software, you've got to understand the underlying hardware, those underlying capabilities, so that you maximize the performance per watt metric that we're talking about. And of course, we're going to have lots of designers that are going to be building these chips. Apple builds its own chips now. Amazon, Microsoft, Google, they're all building their own chips now. And anecdotally, when I talk to my friends at these companies, they're saying they can't find enough engineers to go and design these chips. So there is a fabrication bottleneck. There is risk in the supply chain, but there's also a bottleneck in the design of the chips in the first place. So definitely we need more computer engineers and more students studying these fields. And of course the packaging side, I would say, is more on the vocational side, the 2-year associate's degree that you often hear about that accompany the CHIPS Act. I think that will be incredibly important as well, so that we have a balanced workforce. The most advanced chips being designed here, but also the packaging and testing that goes on.
See, when we think about breakthroughs at SiTime, we say that great stuff happens at the intersection of technologies and the intersection of disciplines. So we don't think of the world as electric engineers and CS people only. We think of engineering, we also think of people from non-engineering fields. So we think of material science, we think of people in physics, from math. So SiTime has a lot of people from those backgrounds because they bring a level of rigor of thinking that intersects with what we do. And so much of this work is now about material science, physics, properties of elements. And then finally, how do you get that out to the customer? We cannot forget the important role of positioning, marketing, digital marketing. We were talking about that earlier, and how powerful this platform is because of digital marketing. The sales guys, I think selling the chips that we make or others make is uniquely, you have to be uniquely qualified to it. So what we do is, first of all, we try to get people early. Second, we go geographically outside. So we're in Michigan, we're in Ann Arbor, we're in Holland, we're in Finland, we're in Ukraine. We have a very nice center in Lviv, and people are still working in spite of the war. We're very proud of that. We have people in Ipoh in Malaysia, we have people in Taiwan, we have people in Japan. And now recently, with our recent acquisition of Aura Semiconductor, we have opened an office in Bangalore in India. And so very, very enlarged group for a company that's less than 400 people. I mean, to have so many locations. So well, that's a way we do it.
We will leave on an optimistic note. Appreciate everyone's insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. And thanks for joining me from the MarketSite studio. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thank you.